Hi, my name is Cherén Alvarado, and I am a literary studies major. For my thesis, I chose to talk about something a little closer to home, which is the coexistence of Black and British stories. So my thesis, the working title, is Perceptible Blackness, using the woman of color to unveil the intrinsic whiteness of the marriage plot. As a descendant of both slave owners and slaves, I have a very particular relationship with the stories told of and by Black people. This relationship gets even more complicated when I consider the intersection of Black stories and British stories, two classes of literature that have found themselves present throughout my life. After Jamaica declared independence in 1969, most of my mother's family immigrated to mainland England to make a better life for themselves. Further inquest into my mom's lineage unveiled more ties to the land, going back several centuries. I am the product of centuries of these stories overlapping, yet I very rarely see this reflected in the literature I read. The existence of Black people in literature, especially in literature written by British authors, has the onus of defining expectations of Black people's existence and purpose in Great Britain. The absence of these characters and their stories speaks louder in those lands than our existence can. Growing up as a half-Black woman, it often occurred to me that I was missing the presence of literary voices that mirrored my own. Representation wasn't an issue my majority white classmates had to face when reading for class. In their minds, they could picture themselves as the Tom Sawyers or the Mr. Darcys. But when I pictured myself as the Black characters in the books I was given to read, I became the Solomon Northups or the Abilene Clarks. My classmates' relationship to literature was markedly different from my own because they had the luxury of seeing themselves represented as so many archetypes, in the literary canons that our schools hailed as superior. The scholar Elaine Scarry writes in her piece, Poetry, Injury, and the Ethics of Reading, that the value of literature lies in its ability to exercise and reinforce our recognition that there are other points of view in this world. Who is represented in our literature and how they are represented defines their presence in societies. Black points of views in literature are infrequently found in pre-20th century literature, and the ones that have helped to define the expectations of the entire race. Black stories are more often than not reserved to side characters who either bolster the white lead's success or act as the obstacle inhibiting their happiness, like Jim from Huckleberry Finn or Bertha Mason from Jane Eyre. Most frequently, the stories told are those of the enslaved, through the words of their enslavers, like The Grateful Negro by Mariah Edgeworth. There's an irreparable harm that's been done to our societies and communities through the constant marginalization of Black stories in our literature and the refusal of allowing them the agency to tell their own stories. So when the only people with the ability to tell these stories are the ones that would benefit from the depiction of Black people as animalistic or subservient, it's extremely difficult to find well-developed characterizations and stories that honestly portray life being Black. The story of Olivia Fairfield, protagonist of the novel I will be analyzing, The Woman of Color, is one that has the potential to drastically shape how Black women are understood and perceived in relation to the dynamic of English society at the time. The Woman of Color was published anonymously in 1808, so just 1 year after the enactment of the Slave Trade Act, which officially prohibited slave trade in the British Empire. Despite the strained political environment that stems from just a great conflict between ideas of morality in England, this anonymous author made the choice to highlight the virtues of Black women in a story that exemplifies the best and the worst qualities that humans have to offer. Olivia is the daughter of a slave owner and an enslaved woman, and has been petitioned by her father upon his deathbed to travel to England and to marry her cousin in order to secure her inheritance. Olivia is the epitome of what a lot of people consider to be a literary heroine. She's kind, she's nurturing, confident, outspoken against injustice, and devoted to God and to her fellow man. Her existence in this very commonly found plotline of British literature speaks volumes to her fortitude in enduring the imminence of being a Black woman in a land that has profited and been built off of the labor of stolen Black bodies. Her overcoming the obstacles presented to her and her success in her marriage and entrance into society is critical to reinforcing the value of Black women and their stories. A marriage plot ending where Olivia is married, has reclaimed her rightful inheritance, and is still affirming her right to exist in England by challenging English society's biases and prejudices through her strength and kindness, is an ending that I would consider successful. This success would help define the possibilities of Black stories and push them into the margins of white stories who have, up until this point, carefully and meticulously excluded Black voices. This book makes such incredible statements and has critical moments that help establish Olivia as a valuable character when it comes to addressing inequality and the immorality of slavery. The positive impact of Olivia's character and what she does and accomplishes throughout the story can't be denied, but it's her ending and how the author chooses to finish her story that I find puts all the progress that she has made in advocating for her and all of Black people's right to exist on British lands at risk. So Olivia's ultimate inability to fully realize the classic marriage plot, to fully succeed, unveils the unspoken whiteness that is actually required for the success of such stories. Despite the capital, title, resilience, grace, and other heroine-like qualities she possesses, Olivia's race is what prohibits her from fully surmounting the traditional marriage plot obstacles of upbringing, capital, and social hierarchy. Her Blackness compounds these already existing conflicts into insurmountable obstacles by limiting her geographic and social mobility, her access to funds, and her ability to advocate for herself in a new foreign English society. White protagonists are, more often than not, they have the ability to move with relative ease across class boundaries, be it through forgery, omission of truth, or marriage. But Olivia's color remains the first thing that people see on her, before her title and her upbringing, and that brings her race, or what else other people perceive to be her race, into the foreground of every single interaction she has in this story. Olivia's perceptible Blackness will always preclude her, in this particular society's eyes, of being possible of holding any of the legitimate prestige that she owns and is entitled to.